In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to set up a white ink file in InDesign CC for the HP Indigo 7900 press. If you have an earlier version of InDesign, the same instructions apply. You just need to be familiar with where to find the panels and the tools that we'll be using. This design uses white ink and it has no CMYK or any other specialty inks. Now before we get started, I'll point out that many times a design using white ink will be shown to a client as a client proof, and usually it will have a layer simulating a dark color of paper so the client can see how the design will look once it's printed. But in order to submit a press-ready file to TPSI, please delete or turn off this layer so that we aren't accidentally printing a base layer of CMYK on an already colored paper. Also be sure that you don't have multiple designs placed as PDF on single pages. You'll need to have every single design on its own page, properly sized the dimensions of that design. If you're unsure how to set that up, please see our video on how to set up proper crops and bleeds and proofing your PDF files in the specific Adobe program that you're using. In this case, it's InDesign CC. In order to set up white ink in InDesign, we'll be using 4 basic panels: the Pages panel, the Layers panel, the Swatches panel, and the Attributes panel. If any of these panels are not already visible, you can bring them up by simply going to Window in the menu bar and selecting whichever panels you need to appear. The Swatches panel is found under the Color section, and the Attributes panel is found under the Output section. Now, in terms of your Pages panel, I need to tell you right off the bat that it's important to not assign white ink to a master page. The Indigo is only set up to read white ink in one layer. If white ink is applied to a master page, the Indigo will see that as 2 layers, and it won't print the white ink you've assigned in the master page layer. Now, I know this is a hassle if you're designing multiple business cards for a company and you want to avoid having to copy and paste all your white ink elements into each card, but unfortunately this is what you're going to have to do in order to get the press to read your file correctly. Okay, so since I've turned off the paper layer on my design, I'll need to select everything on my page, and for now I'm just going to make it 100% K. If you are just starting your design, then you can begin using a white ink swatch from the beginning. But before we get to that, let's start with setting up the proper layer. In your Layers panel, create a new layer, and you'll need to change the name to white ink. Simply double-click on the new layer, and it will pull up a panel where you can rename the layer. Type in white ink exactly the way I have it here. This is case sensitive. If you spell it any other way, it won't work because this is the labeling we've used to program our HP Indigo 7900. And so that needs to be spelled capital W, H-I-T-E, space, capital I-N-K. Now that we have the layer named, let's create a white ink swatch. Go to your Swatches panel and click the drop-down menu in the upper right corner. Select New Color Swatch, and that panel will appear. In the Swatch Name section, you'll see there's a box that says Name with Color Value. Deselect that box. When you do, you can see that you can now edit the swatch name. Name this exactly the same way that you named your layer, white ink. Again, this is case sensitive and specific to our press. Under Color Type, select Spot, and under Color Mode, make sure that it's in CMYK. Now go to your sliders and create a color that you want to use for your white ink. At TPSI, we generally use 100% magenta as our white ink spot color, but you can use anything you'd like as long as it is in 100% K. The press isn't looking for the color of the swatch, it's looking for the swatch to be a spot color that's labeled white ink. Okay, so now that you've got your white ink swatch made, just hit OK. You know you have your white ink swatch properly loaded if you see a black dot in the lower right-hand corner of that swatch. I would also recommend deleting all the extra swatches in your Swatches panel except for the first 4 and your white ink swatch. I will also point out that if you created a logo or any vector art in Illustrator using white ink, or you've created a white ink photo in Photoshop, you can place those files into InDesign as long as you have the identical white ink swatch or white ink channel assigned to those files and you place it into the white ink layer. So in other words, if your white ink spot color is 100% magenta in Illustrator and your white ink spot channel is 100% magenta in Photoshop, It will have to be 100% magenta here in InDesign. If you see two different white ink spot colors in your swatches panel, then you need to delete one. There should be only one white ink spot color in your swatches panel, and you need to figure out if you need to change the ones in Illustrator or Photoshop, but it's all got to be the same. Now you can select the swatch, and since we're only using the white ink layer, you can begin creating your design. Now in general, we have our press operator apply 4 hits of white ink to the designs to ensure a good opacity, but white ink will also work applied as a transparency. If you add transparency of white ink to your design, simply select that element and assign it a transparency percentage. Let's say I'm going to apply it to this pattern. Even though this element will still get 4 hits of white ink, it will still maintain a lighter appearance as the other elements without transparency, and I'll show you later when we proof our PDF how you can check for that. I'm not using a transparency in this design, so I'm going to change it back to 100%. Once you have your design completed, also make sure that you have all of your type converted to outlines. To do that, just select all of your text, go to Type, and select Create Outlines. I usually don't do this step until I have final approval from my client to make sure there aren't going to be any other text changes and right before I export my file to a PDF. Now take your selection tool and select all of the elements where you've applied white ink. Once those are selected, go to the Attributes panel and select Overprint Fill. Now if your design has strokes, you'll also select Overprint Stroke unless it's grayed out, and if it's grayed out, don't worry about it and just select Overprint Fill. In order to get the best color output on our HP Indigo 7900, we ask that you change the PDF settings. In the preset, instead of the default entry, open up the drop-down menu and select Press Quality. In the standard drop-down menu, select PDF X4 2010. You'll notice when you do that, the compatibility field will automatically change to Acrobat 7, PDF 1.6 or higher. Under the Options settings, go ahead and View PDF after exporting. You can leave the other options selected or unselected based on your own preferences. Now we're going to move out of the General settings into the Marks and Bleeds settings. Select Marks and Bleeds. At TPSI for white ink, only check the trim marks under the Marks section. Don't use any of these other settings. In the Bleed and Slug section, use Document Bleed settings if you have a bleed. Click the Save PDF and you should see your PDF open up. I'm using Adobe Acrobat DC. Even if you have an earlier version of Acrobat, you still have the settings we're getting ready to look at. Now we're going to proof your file to make sure it will print correctly. Once you have your PDF file open, you should see your trim marks and the designated bleed area. Once you've seen those are set correctly, go to Tools and look for Print Production. Open up that section, then look for Output Preview. You'll notice right away that a panel will open up, and the only thing I want you to pay attention to is the separation sections at the bottom of this panel. You'll notice that it will show you all the process plates as well as the spot plates. Now if you've set up your file correctly, you should see a white ink spot color listed under the spot plates. You'll also notice that it's at 0%. So you're going to need to take your cursor and start moving it over all the areas where you've applied ink. You should see it registered 100% in areas where you've assigned it 100% and as a transparency percentage in the areas where you've assigned it a transparency. Now if all of this is reading correctly, then that's it. Your file is ready to send to us for printing.